Really sorry about the length of this next video. This one and the dyeing the vertices are both lengthy videos. I'm planning to do a time-lapsed version of these so that you can watch the whole entire thing in like 30 minutes. But if you really want to see the process for stamping a braid pattern, I would suggest the longer version. One of the things that's helpful when you watch the full video is to see not just me stamping a project, but my attempt at learning how to use that stamp on that project. Because there's always going to be that first time when you take a fill stamp or border stamp and you're trying to lay it on a project, trying to keep from screwing it up because you've already spent the time cutting it and punching holes and all of that. And yeah, you've spent some time practicing, but there's also taking that practice and implementing it, making it practical or functional on the project itself, and that is a challenge. That is that first project that you do with a fill stamp or a border stamp or a custom stamp stamping, you really want to get it right. So I'm going to show you literally my first attempt at using this stamp on an actual project and what I go through trying to figure out how to do it without screwing it up. So, enjoy. I'm not really trying real hard to make it perfect, but the braided pattern here, that's what a fill looks like, an actual fill, where you run the braid literally right next to it. I kind of would rather have a little bit of area in the middle of it that I'm going to separate with a color like black. So this will be green, and then this outer surface will be black. Okay, so now that I've done that, now comes the challenge of actually doing it. I've made this piece here, and now I'm going to get it soaking wet, and I'm going to actually try to stamp that pattern in, finally. A lot of work just to lead up to this one point where, you know, you do the actual stamping. So, get my sponge, get it with water, get it nice and wet, and I'm going to get this wet. The chromium white seems to be a little resistant of water. I don't know why, but it just doesn't seem to want to absorb it in like some of the other pieces of leather I've used. I really don't know why that is. I don't know anything about the actual process, so I can't say why that is. I keep saying it over and over again. I probably should just say it one time and leave it at that. But get it nice and wet. And there's people who say wait, don't wait, you know, and oh, I had a little bit of green right there that kind of got on there. But it's not going to matter because the green is what I'm going to be doing. It's not going to be white anyway, so. Move this in place a little bit. This camera. There we go. Okay. Now we're going to actually try to do this. And I'm going to start it right at the edge here. Close to the edge anyway. Try to get it even. This is the moment of truth right here. Trying to get it nice and straight. And it can be a challenge. It's really easy to get off track. And the other problem with white, it's a little bit hard to see when you're doing this. It's a lot easier to see, you know, the direction of your pattern with another color. And I'm running really slow here. There's some people that are on here that are super fast and they do everything just right, but I'm not exactly great at stamping. So I'm going to take it nice and slow and make sure I get every stamp just right. Now I'm going to run into a bit of a challenge here because at some point the flap, I'm going to line up to the flap here. Then I have to decide whether I want to curve along with the flap or not. And I'm not. I'm just going to run straight up into the threading with it. You see, it's not perfectly straight, but now I'm going to run off into the threading. So I'm going to try to do it, stamp at an angle, like so. And then I'll run the next line at an angle here at a bit, flip my thing around, and try to get it just on there, like so, so that it looks like I am going to be, let's see here, so you can see that the line looks like it's going into there. I'm going to flip it over. It's a lot easier when you're putting the point into the crux like this. And do this one that I didn't get done, like so. And this one, you're basically just putting the notch in like so. Try to keep it straight. It's not going to be perfect because I'm, like I say, I'm not the best at this, but perfection is unattainable. In the words of Tin Cup, perfection is unattainable. Oop, looks like I'm getting a little bit off track there. Yep, I've slipped out of the pattern. As you can see here, now it's not lining up properly. That is the challenge of doing something like this. So I have to start stamping a little bit further away to try and level it off. Like so. Okay. Looks like I can do one more stamp here. At an angle just to try and get that. Now I'm going to flip it around. Make sure I get it right this time. Do the first one here. Sometimes the water, when you look at it, the one flaw with stamping is it doesn't take much to lose your pattern until it actually dries. So now I'm flipping my thing here, and I'm trying to get it lined up right in there. Like so. So that I get that line right there. Well, I'm back, and yeah, I screwed up. That's what it boils down to. When you're using stamps like this, I mean, they're great. You find one you really like, but it actually takes a lot of time to learn how to use a stamp properly. And every stamp's a little bit different. I mean, some stamps, when you place it down, there's a little notch that tells you where to put it. Some don't have that. This doesn't have a nice little notch. You have to basically just sort of figure it out. And, you know, what I've been doing is trying to line up the, let me see if I can zoom in here so you can see what I'm planning to do, or what I've been doing. Get a feel for it. On this design, I've been trying to line up the point right in the crux of the braid, and allowing me just to run a row up that way, and just trying to keep it as straight as I can as I do so. And I have done a fair amount of practice. That's why this one actually looks okay, because, you know, I practice a fair amount stamping up like this. And I practice stamping the braided pattern together. But what I haven't done any practice on at all is what I did here, where I tried to take this stamp and go this direction, like so, and then flip it over and try to create an alternated direction in order to create something that looks a little bit like this. Right here, it looks like this braid's coming through under the leather to this piece, and so forth. It looks like there's this trajectory of the braid going under the leather into the other braid. It's really hard to see on the white, but you can see the pattern reverses. What I didn't count on, first of all, I hadn't practiced it at all. I got the idea and said, hey, let me take something I spent all this time working on, namely this, and let me just try to do something I've never tried before. That's what an amateur does, to be honest with you. There's no question I'm an amateur. A pro would have already spent significant time learning the tool and knowing how to approach it, and from experience would have known better than just to try something out of the blue without putting some time into learning how to do it. So I'm not so sure I can salvage it at this point. I really don't know. But I do have an idea of how I can hopefully make this work still. So this time I'm going to spend a little more time in preparation. And when you're doing something like this, where you've added a layer of complexity to it, because I'm literally alternating this braid, it runs this way and then it alternates and runs the opposite way the other way, I really have to prepare a little bit more carefully. So what I'm going to do first is I need to get I set aside. The other thing to do, when you screw up like this, and you know you've screwed up royally, you have two choices. You can just toss it, or you can use it as a learning experience. And even if you don't actually keep it or use it and you end up tossing it afterwards, at least still you've made it an object lesson. At the very least, I'll learn how to do this particular style when I'm done. Probably ruin the project in the process, but afterwards I should be able to repeat it and do it properly the next time. And that's okay. Sometimes that's just the way it goes. Sometimes you do something that works out beautifully, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you end up tossing it afterward because it looks like crap. But at least you've learned how not to do something, and that's okay too. So I'm going to get this wet. I'm not going to spend a lot of time letting it get wet. I probably should, and I know some people would say, that's a mistake, but Just really want to be able to start and get something worked out. This time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the row all the way across here. I'm going to take my ruler and set the first, based on these little dots here. Let me get a little bit better so you can see here. Zoom in a little bit, not that much. These dots are a reference point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and go up to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th dot. Okay, the 5th dot here. Wait. Actually, it's the 4th dot. 4th dot. Wait. Actually, it's the 4th dot. 4th dot. And I'm going to run across. Try to get an idea of where I'm going to be putting this. So from here to here, it's looking like I've got about 2 centimeters. That's what the second row is running at, is 2 centimeters. I'm going to set the pattern at the 2 centimeter mark and just mark it. So I know where that this running this way is supposed to go, and I'm going to actually stamp that right at the mark, just like the others. Trying to keep it straight. So there I have it. Got one there. Trying to keep it straight, which is tricky. That one shifted on me. It happens sometimes. So this is going to be my lead right here. I'll see if I can show you. I created this line across here, and I've lined it up by a ruler so that this line starts right where I need it to. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to do the opposite side with this one right here, and I'm going to mark the other side so I know where the other one should go. Making sure I find the right one, and it'll be this one right here. That's the right one. Make sure that I'm lined up with these holes on the side. 8. So now I'm going to mark the next side right in the center of these two. So this is going to be right in the center. Should have done it this way, so I know the exact center. And I'm going to measure it in this time. Let's see if that will work. Okay, this is not measuring exact the way it should have. A little bit off. And that'll be the set for the next mark, like this, where I flip it and it actually goes the other way. So I have to invert this and do it this way. And that should put the line right at the right spot. This thing's off already. Keeps moving. So we'll see how it worked out, because now I've measured it. Okay. So now I have what you might call the cornerstone for these lines going up. So when you have one in place, then the way this pattern works, you simply have to take the point here and set it right in between the Y and run it all the way up. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to literally run it all the way up, starting with this one, since I already did this one. I might have to make a correction here on this one, because it's a little bit off. The other thing I need to do is I need to mark on my actual tool where that braid comes out, because that's part of the problem, is I don't know. And I mark my tools when I have to, so I know it. If it doesn't have a special type of, that's where that braid comes out. Braid comes out right here. And then of course this one comes out here. That's obvious, so I'm not worried about that one. Now there's marks on my tool to tell me where the braid comes out. It'll help me in lining this up, because I'm going to have to make a little bit of a correction here and stamp a little bit more in. And that's how you correct something like this, is you'll move a little bit more into the Y and make sure the braid's lined up, and hopefully that'll help to correct the problem. That's what I'm looking at doing at this point, because I can't fix the damage that's done. All I can do is try to make it as unnoticeable as possible. And there you have it. Now I'll run it up through, trying to line up that braid. Try and keep it as straight as I can, because that's always a challenge when you don't have, when you're trying to do this by eye. And it's really, really close still, so I just keep going up. And I'm actually matching this area here on my tool with where that braid should be coming in at. And I'm allowing that to decide where I actually place the tool versus just putting it in the point into the Y. That way the braid lines up and it looks right. And sometimes you're going to veer off a little bit, so just move your stamp back in and get it back on track. That's definitely the amateur way of doing it. And you run all the way up. This pattern will be a lot more noticeable when it's all colored properly. That's when you'll really see the pattern come out. Sometimes you'll notice it's a little off. You just have to make an adjustment. So I'll move this one out a little bit. As I said before, this little spot there, the little marking, is what I'm actually using to determine the flow on this other side, to try and match up the braid. And I'm having to make a few adjustments as I go along to keep that braid pattern consistent, because it's a little bit off. But when you can actually, in the dyeing process, it's not going to be nearly as noticeable. Be careful when you stamp over a hole. You don't want to stamp so hard that you blunt your tool on the other side. And when you get to an edge like this, what I do is I elevate the one side here so it doesn't stamp all the way across. So I just do it like a half stamp on the one side and let it just sort of taper off. That's how I do it. And it looks like this is going to have to be redone at some point, where I go back down in and I strengthen the braid. But I can do that later. Okay, so now I've got the reverse to do, and I find it easier when I flip it around and go like this. And that way you can see this pattern coming through, where it looks like it's going like this, going down in there. Same here, it's supposed to go through there. Yeah. So the alternation. Now this is a little bit trickier because I'm actually flipping the tool. Now I'm going to be trying to take the center point here and lining up in the Y, which is a little bit different, because you got to go all the way to the center of the Y to really make it work right. And this is actually the hardest part of doing this. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to run these rows up this way and then try to just place it in the center. And that might be a mistake in the long run, but I'd rather have these rows done so I can actually match it on the opposite side and try to match it that way. So make sure my tool's centered. Make sure my tool is centered. That's where you got to be really careful, because doing a straight line, it'd be very easy to get it off track a little bit. And then you end up with a braided pattern that's actually rolling to one side. So if you run into a problem, I've already determined the distance between these two is 2 millimeters. So all you have to do is just check it and make sure that I'm still running at 2 millimeters. And you can see here, actually 2 centimeters, I stand corrected. 1, 2, I'm just a little bit off. So I need to roll it back a little bit the other way. Roll it back a little bit the other way to bring it back into line. But not too much, because otherwise it starts rolling the other direction. Now the best stamps, in my opinion, are the ones that have little notches that you literally just slide a notch into and it lines it up for you. This one doesn't have that. So you really have to learn how to do it by eye, and it takes some practice. A lot of practice, actually. So I'm going to measure, make sure that I'm still in the 2 millimeter range, and I'm still off. I have shifted about a full millimeter off, so I literally have to bring it back in again. And it may be that this line's a little bit off, so I'm running off this way because of it. But usually the eye doesn't notice the slight deviation. Being a basket weave pattern, there's a little bit of flexibility in that, in the way the eye perceives it. For whatever reason, the eye doesn't expect it to be perfect. Okay, so check again, make sure I'm at 2 centimeter. And I've also shifted upward a little bit. This one is up by about 1 millimeter as well, so I've got to start shifting it back down again. You can see how challenging it can be to get a pattern like this just right. So I'm still a little bit off to one side by 1 millimeter, and I'm now 1 millimeter forward. So I got to stamp back into the Y a little bit more for the next so many turns, and also shift it a little bit to the left. I'm going to push this back in more into the Y to lose that little bit of extra and shift it a little bit more to the left still. And then I'll check it again, see if I've managed to make any corrections. That's almost dead on right now. So now I can try to go back the way I was and just keep it straight, now that I've adjusted for that change. And you'll find sometimes you favor one direction over the other. When you're stamping, you have a tendency to move in one direction, kind of like golfing. Some people tend to slice right or slice left. And if you're right-handed, you may cause you to move one direction over the other, just naturally. And you got to make adjustments accordingly, because I am literally doing this by eye. Now I could have measured every single one of these, but that adds a lot of work to the project. I just don't know that that's necessary to go to that point. You know, like right there, it's dead on, absolutely dead on right now, which is what I was hoping for. Some people have an eye for it, and they're just gifted in this way. The kind of people that can do that really neat florid writing on silver work or whatever, just amazing. Amazing talent that some people have for this kind of thing. I'm, average. A lot of people are average. So there we go. I've got one more line. You can see it moves a little bit, but that's partly because of this one. I check it, and I'm pretty close. Pretty dang close. So now I've got one more to do. I've got to do this one here. Make sure I get it right. Otherwise it'll get screwed up. And it'll definitely show. And in this case, I'm matching up this little mark that I made on the side with that. That will help me to line it up properly, so it's not too far off. Okay, now I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to go the opposite way. And that's where these marks come in handy on the side here. See if I can get it really close up so you can see. I've marked where the braid comes out here on both sides so that I can, it helps me to match up where the braid's going to come in at. In fact, it might be easier to start up here. Now this is just a test. It's possible that I'll end up screwing it up by doing this, but sometimes you're just looking at it going, you know what, I'd really rather do it the other way and try to move into this. And I'm sure there's an expert watching this. Well, maybe there is. Maybe there isn't an expert watching it going, dude, you're screwing it up if you do that. But I find it a lot easier to match this end of the Y than the other way around. So I'm going to see if I can match this up. It's a little bit off, as I'd mentioned before. So I'm going to try to split the difference. There we go, right there. That's where I'm guessing. I think that's about the spot I'm looking at right now. Now I just need to move the opposite way and try to match up these braids. Move in as far as I need to, or out as much as I need, because there's a little flexibility in the pattern to try and get that to match up. And what I'm talking about is the way this Y comes out to the braid, because that's what I'm using as a reference. And I've noticed there's a few areas here where the braid is a little bit more off on one side than the other, and I'm having to make adjustments accordingly. But braided patterns tend to be fairly flexible in those kind of situations. This is one of the more challenging things to do with leather working, is trying to stamp a pattern in and make it look good. Really easy to screw it up. Like this is off. So I'm going to have to move more into the Y to try and get it to match up a little better. As I said before, when I got a little bit too far to one side, and as I said, there was a millimeter difference between the two in this area, so I'm splitting the difference. Anyone who's done any measuring knows exactly what I'm referring to. When you make a mistake or something, you have to split the difference between the two. to try and even it up, to create a balance. And this is me trying to salvage a mistake that I made earlier on, and we'll see how it works out. It's possible it'll look like crap. I'm not really sure at this point. You know, the one I was going to say, this isn't very wet, and there are some that swear you do not want to stamp if it's not wet. And the only problem I have with stamping when it's wet is sometimes the leather swells out and it ruins the pattern for whatever reason. The water actually destroys the pattern. The wetness of it can cause the leather to swell, and then your pattern gets lost. And it does not look good when it does that. Okay. There we go. I'm getting really close to lining up with that other line. As I said before, I'm trying to split the difference, make sure that braid matches up. Now, got to be careful here because I'm going to be matching up into the other one, and I need to make sure that it looks seamless. It's looking like it's going to be fine. Looking at it now, it actually looks okay. And there you go. I've run right into the other side. So now I just need to finish this up. Move back a little bit here, split the difference, like so. One more, should do it. It's a little bit off, but that's the way it goes sometimes. It's not perfect. You'll see that this line here has actually run inwards, particularly at this area here. And it's actually not this line that's running inwards, it's this one here is off. As you can see from this right here. Fortunately, there's no good way of marking that to make it perfect that I know of. You know, and a lot of it is worked by hand, which poses a bit of a challenge. I'm going to do a little bit more here. There we go. So, now I'm back to doing the other way. And I'm going to try to do what I did before here. And in some cases, it's nice just to be able to draw a line so you know where your line's going to fit. Problem is that if you put anything on this white, it doesn't want to come off. I literally can't mark with a pencil or a pen and not have it damaged. So there's one other thing I can do, and I'm going to go ahead and show you that when I come back. Okay, on to the next row, and this one I'm going to have to do by eye because it's the alternated branch. And what I'm looking for here, as I said before, I'm trying to line up this with that so that the pattern looks like it's moving in the right direction. as you can see here. But I'm beginning to think it might be better if I ran up this way first. This pattern's exactly 1 centimeter from here to there. So I'm thinking if I maybe it would be a good idea to try and line this up with over here. Problem is this flap. It's really hard to gauge how far in it should be. I'd just be doing it by hand unless I brought it over to the measuring mat right here, which I could use the measuring map here. That's why I have it there. And see if I can do a little measurement first. Make sure that I get this line straight. Because I've noticed that I'm drifting to one side with this line. I need to make sure my line is running straight. So I line this up here, along the line over here, and then this line's lined up, and I get a sense for how straight this is going by doing this. And that there is basically straight. So, let me move the other side. I screwed up. Because what I wanted the millimeter on this side to make sure that I had the right pattern. Putting a slight dot that'll get covered at some point when I'm stamping and dyeing. Very slight dot, exactly 1 centimeter, so that I know where my line is going to run. You can't see it, but it is there. I think stamping white is one of the hardest to do, actually. Okay, got that row done. Line up this pattern. Try to keep it straight. Now I'm going to go ahead and try the other side and do the same thing with this one and see if I can use the same technique to create a straight line. Because I'm thinking maybe I need to focus more on making my lines straight, at least one line at a time. So that the other one will match up a little better. So that's what I'm doing here. Okay. Same thing here. I've decided to do one pattern at a time. Just because I found it too difficult trying to keep these lines straight otherwise. So this really is just a practice one for this technique. I'm not expecting it to turn out great, but hopefully I'll get the pattern and the technique down so that the next time I do this, it'll be as close to flawless as an amateur could hope for. And you'll find that a lot, that I've noticed there's not a lot of experts out there teaching you how to use specific tools and how to develop a technique for it. Unfortunately, I wish they would, but a lot of them are just, I think they take it for granted what they actually know. Their knowledge just they take it for granted. They just assume that other people know some of the stuff that they know, and here they are just stamping these beautiful patterns as if they just started yesterday and were perfect at it from the very beginning. You don't really get to see them develop the process or technique through trial and error and through practice. And I think that's a mistake. I think it helps to see someone start off with and try to learn the technique and come up with the best way to do it, so that you can see for yourself how it's done and how they've worked around some of the issues they face. Because every stamp's different. Literally. And there we have, it's a little bit off. You can see right here. It's a good millimeter off, unfortunately. I should have been a little bit more mindful. But the one thing it's going for is this line's almost dead on. right along here, it's straight. But the actual pattern, if you look here, it's off by about, I'd say about 1 millimeter. So I'm going to have to, when I run up the other way, I'm going to have to split the difference the whole way. Every stamp is going to be a special adjustment for the mistake. But I like the way that this is going. At least I'm getting a better idea of how to approach this. So again, I'm going to do my measurements here, as I've been doing, going by centimeter. That's wrong side again. There we go. I don't really like to use pencil on white leather because sometimes you can't get rid of it. I'm going to try to erase it off before I do any dye work, but that may not work. We'll have to see how that's going to end up. Okay. It's time to move the next direction. Oh no, I misspoke, actually. It's not time to do the next direction yet. I'm still working this last line. I have one more line this way, then I'll have to move back the other way with the other pattern, alternating. So my primary focus with this other technique, where I actually measure the distance, is to create perfectly straight lines. That's the technique I'm trying to work on now, is to find a good way to make those straight lines and see if that's a better approach than what I was doing before. Because what I was doing before just wasn't working. This stamp's a lot easier to use when you're just doing it as a fill, when you're literally just filling it. Because then you just match it up all the way along and it's a lot easier to work it. But when you have a little bit of space between the two, like what I'm doing, a sort of modified version of the pattern, it does pose very unique challenges, fortunately. In truth, I wish I just kept the lines like this with a big gap in the middle, because I actually prefer that. And the next time, that is what I'm going to do, because I think it makes a much nicer pattern. Okay, so what I've got here, you can see this is a fill, or close to a fill. I would call this a half fill, because it's almost an actual fill, but it's not. See, it has a nice look when you got that pattern separated by a strip. It's just beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful doing it that way. And the next one I do, that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to just do a stripe and it separate with a separation like that. Okay, now I've got to flip and do the other way. And I'm going to be matching up the band on this one. So this one I do by eye. Literally do by eye. It's more of a challenge. So I'm trying to get that band to match up. I shifted a little bit there. Okay. After doing this for a while, your hands are going to get sore and you'll start making mistakes. So once you get to that point, it's not a bad idea just to take a break and set it aside and come back to it. Me, I just want to get it done. I'm a little bit off here, but I knew that was going to happen because I was stamping it a little bit off. So I'll move in a little bit more to try and preserve that pattern as much as possible. I don't know why I find that amusing. It really isn't. Okay, so here I am back into the thick of it. Trying to decide how to do this. Sometimes you lose your momentum if you're not careful, and I definitely need a light source here. You need really good lighting for this to do it well. Let me mute that light a little bit so you can actually see. Okay, so I'm going to be lining up the braid as I did before, trying to keep it centered. Hopefully I don't screw it up. Sometimes when you walk away from a project and come back to it, you have a hard time getting back into it and not screwing it up. I'm not sure why that is. Murphy's Law, maybe. But, yeah. I've done it before. Like this is running a little bit to this one side, as you can see. So I'm definitely screwing it up. Now I got to drift it back the other way a little bit before I get too far that way. It may have been a flaw in the way that I stamped the original too. And I just double stamped. Yeah. It's not good. Double stamping, that is, not a good thing. Sometimes you just can't help it. Your tool just sort of drifts. You don't intend for it to happen, but it does. And I am doing the no-no of no-nos right here, admittedly. I am stamping the leather when it's not wet. Part of the reason for that is because if you look at the side there, when I did the leather wet, it swelled up and the pattern didn't stay in place. Now I got to go over it and redo it. Anyway, back in the saddle again. Let's make sure I got this all lined up. Okay, that looks okay. It's a little bit off, but there's nothing I can do about it. It's more important to try and keep it as straight as you can. Oh, I drifted a little bit there. Now this, I have to admit, when the time comes, is going to be an absolute bear to try and paint. It is not going to be easy. In fact, I suspect it's going to take me, all told, I'm guessing in the neighborhood of about 3 hours straight of dyeing. And one little mistake will... The thing about stamping is you can make a mistake and it's not as obvious, but if you make a mistake when you're dyeing, something like this, it will show. And there's no way to hide it, other than just to do the whole thing in black, which will ruin the whole point of it. The whole point of doing a design is to have some kind of uniformity and, you know, something that looks nice. And I've got some flaws here. You can see that the braided pattern's all over the place. You know, the way it runs through, it's a little bit off. Like here it's running at an angle, here it's running at the other angle, and then that one's going at a different angle. This one's more uniform. I mean, there's definitely an inconsistency in the way that this pattern is running, which is not good. But the beauty of braided patterns is sometimes that just adds more, you know, color to it. It really does. Just makes it more interesting. Doesn't necessarily destroy it. Okay. Over a little bit more over there. I think that works. One more. Kind of coincide with that. Okay. Now I'm going to be doing the next level. I'm going to do this one here first, trying to keep this pattern in place and straight. Stamping white is a challenge in general because it's kind of hard to see. That didn't stamp very well. One more time. There we go. Okay. Oh, that didn't stamp very well either. Sometimes you have to go back over and do some of the stuff over again to really bring out the definition. Okay, now I'm going to run this up the way that I did before, trying to keep it straight, keep the pattern uniform. go. The one thing, even though this is extremely busy, and I think that detracts from the design element, it has a very Celtic feel to it because of all of the way that it just sort of interweaves in it. You really get a feel for the Gaelic or the Celtic influence in this design. It's sort of consistent with that style. Stamping is an art and a skill. The more you do it, the better you are at it, skill-wise, but there's also an art to it, trying to figure out how to take just a basic design and then make something aesthetically pleasing. That's where the artist or creativity comes in. Well, no question about it. If there's one thing you should do when you're stamping, is practice beforehand. Now you won't be able to really see this in its full measure until I actually dye it. Then you'll see how the pattern is going to come forth. Let's see here, maintaining that braided style. There we go. I'm getting there slowly but surely. I got one good row left to do right up here, and that's it. And then I'll have to do some touch-up work. Okay, one more row. I got to move this up a little bit more here. Okay. There we go. It's a lot harder to stamp the inverse pattern than it is the other pattern, because you have to line up the braid as it goes in, and that's a lot more of a challenge. Okay, getting there slowly but surely. So what I'm doing here is I'm lining up the mark, as I said before, in the braid here with this little braided design on the reverse. And then I take the point here and I'm making sure it's pointing due north, according to the design anyway. Not actually due north, but so that it helps to keep the actual pattern straight. Because if you get it off kilter, then it'll show. which is the reason why I have some variation in the pattern. So this is what you basically call a fill pattern, when you're just taking a stamp and you're using it to fill out the space. I call that fill stamping, or stamping a fill pattern. Then there's border stamping, where you're stamping along an edge. And then there's what you might call design or image stamping, which is designed to do something, not just a design, but a face or an image or an animal, something very specific, which is quite challenging. But when it works out, it's rewarding. Very rewarding. Just looks neat when you do something that just works. Okay, I am almost finished here with the pattern itself. Okay, now got to go back here and look and see if there's any of these that need to be restamped. All of this side needs to be restamped. You can see it's sort of washed out, as I've said before, over and over again. It has to be redefined because it got screwed up. The water, if you get your leather too wet, then what can happen, you can end up with the leather swelling, and then it washes out the design. Then you got to go back over it and redefine it with the stamp, which is what I'm doing now. You got to be really careful when you do it. What I do is I set the stamp down into the pattern, and then I move it side to side to make sure it locks into it. Otherwise, you'll end up, if you're not careful, you'll end up double stamping, and that really looks like crap when you double stamp. Which I've done a few times on this design even. Really, really close to doing the next step here. Okay, I got this row to do now. It's a little bit washed out as well. As I said, you set it in the pattern and you sort of twist side to side to lock it in. Otherwise you end up double stamping. Yep, still needs a little bit more. I've completed the pattern here. Now I just got to finish doing touch-up wherever it needs a little bit of touch-up to make sure that it looks exactly the way it's supposed to. There are some places where I carry the pattern all the way out like that. I really don't need to do that, but since I've done it there, I almost have to do it here as well. Which is okay. I don't mind doing that if I have to. It helps to add to the seamlessness of it to do that. So there we have it. That is the basic pattern that's been stamped on there now. I know it's hard to see as it is now. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to literally put it on some plastic and I'm going to dye it. Completely dye it all the way through, both sides. Because the base of it's going to be green all the way through. And then I'm going to literally take a brush and I'm going to dye all of this little area right here black. So you're going to have these lines of black that run all the way up through it, just like that. All the way up through it. And then once I've dyed all these little areas here black, then I'll do an antiquing to help to sort of add a little more definition to it. Well, looks at it. That one's way off right there. I totally missed the mark on that one. That's the double one. I did a double stamp right there. I remember now. So I'm going to go and redo it sharply. Try to fix it. Try to fix this one too. Sometimes you can just redo it and it'll fix it for you. Okay, so that's the basic pattern. Kind of interesting.